I'm up against a machine that has millions of dollars, that has the ability to fight me.
People have to have confidence justice is going to be administered fairly, regardless of who you are.
Catherine Herridge, thank you so much for joining us. Your latest story up on CatherineHerridgeReports.com reveals that federal law enforcement agencies knew the Hunter Biden laptop story was real, and yet they pumped the brakes on an investigation. Tell us a little bit about this massive, massive scoop.
Well, one of the things that struck me with the IRS whistleblowers is that you dial it back 4 years ago, and everyone was labeling the Hunter Biden laptop as a Russian plant. But what the whistleblowers told us is that in late 2019, everyone on that investigative team, so the IRS, the FBI, Justice Department prosecutors, they all knew that Hunter Biden's laptop was real. And really from that point forward, the IRS, Justice Department, they were tapping the brakes on this investigation. And they were blocked from taking very standard overt investigative steps like issuing subpoenas. And they were completely blocked from investigating anything that might have led to Joe Biden, but they said you could not ask about the big guy.
Who was doing the pumping of the brakes? Like lay out the because people are going to hear this and think this is a conspiracy. Like we're told a lot of conspiracies aren't true. This really sounds like one. Who were the people that came forward that we just saw in that clip, Catherine, that you have reported on, these whistleblowers? Who, like, where was the word coming down from?
Right. So the two whistleblowers are Gary Shapley. He was the supervisory special agent on the Hunter Biden case. And then Joseph Ziegler, he was the line agent or the case agent. He was really doing all the footwork in the case. And he was the one that found the lead that ultimately opened the Hunter Biden investigation. The pressure, the tapping of the brakes, this was really coming from prosecutors at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Delaware. They were telling them, you can't take standard investigative steps. We don't want you issuing subpoenas. We don't want you executing search warrants. You can't ask questions that might lead to the big guy prior to the election. Now, you can say, well, there are prohibitions about taking investigative steps, overt investigative steps prior to an election. But as the case agent says, this was not a presidential candidate. This was only the son of a presidential candidate. So they said there was clearly a double standard, not only in the IRS and the treatment of this case, but also by the Justice Department.
Catherine, just to put it in context for people who might not know all the details of the case, one of the things that's most important to us as journalists and people who are observing the 2020 election and now is that the 50-odd intelligence officials that came out and said that the laptop was not definitely Russian misinformation, but could very well be. What you're reporting is that they knew this, and I think we've known this before, but they knew this well before that letter came out. One would presume that these people that were former heads of the CIA, et cetera, would know this information. And did you have any indication that they did know that information and went ahead with it just for purely political purposes?
Well, when you look very closely at that statement they released, they said it bore the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation.
Yes.
And what happened with a lot of the journalists is they kind of distorted that, and they conflated it into it's Russian disinformation or it's a Russian plan. And you make a very good point, Michael. What was known by the intelligence community, by the FBI, the IRS, the Justice Department at that time is that the laptop was authentic, and they'd almost known for an entire year because it was the cornerstone of the Hunter Biden investigation. So a former CIA director, for example, these people are plugged in. They could have made some calls to figure out what's the word on the street with this Hunter Biden laptop. But it looks like they just didn't. They just signed on to this letter at the behest. It looks like Secretary Blinken was the one who really got the ball rolling on it.
It wasn't just, if I'm sort of casting my mind back to the time when everyone was talking about the laptop, there was not just a silencing of the kind that you're reporting on in this latest story inside the intelligence agencies. There was a silencing on the part of anyone that was curious inside the legacy press. You have spent your life inside organizations like CBS, Fox News, as a reporter. You've only recently gone independent and you're crushing it. Can you reflect a little bit on your time inside CBS, or if you want to speak more generally about the way that the legacy press responded to stories like this that were sort of inconvenient to their chosen political ideology?
Well, what I would say about the Hunter Biden laptop story is that I was assigned that story from the very top of CBS, George Cheeks. So this is someone who runs news, entertainment, and then also the sports division. And I was told it was a very high priority for the network. What I didn't anticipate is that executives beneath him, show producers, didn't have the same appetite for the story and didn't understand this whole concept of speaking truth to power and holding both sides of the aisle, the left and the right, accountable. So my experience with that story is that while at the top there was a real desire to lead with solid reporting, there was a lot of resistance at the lower levels. And particularly on the Hunter Biden laptop, I eventually reported on that for CBS News in 2022, late 2022. And what I would say on that point is that anyone who knows me knows it doesn't take me 2 years to authenticate anything. This doesn't take me 2 years, and I'll leave it at that.
Right. And also to point out that as journalists, we know that the corroboration which was presented to the average news consumer as this very difficult task, that all one had to do to get the ball rolling was look at some of those emails, contact the people who got those emails and say, did you send this email? Is this you? And they would say yes, and you say, okay, this stuff is authentic. But Catherine, I mean, this story right now, I know there's people that say, what does this matter now? At this point, why is it relevant? It's an interesting story looking backwards, but what do you say to people who ask that question?
Well, I think that this story matters because it's about the public having confidence in these institutions that are the cornerstone of our democracy. You want to have confidence that the Justice Department, the FBI, the IRS, that they're going to treat American citizens fairly, and there's not going to be disparate treatment depending on where they are in society. What we learned in our investigation from the IRS whistleblowers is they say that there was disparate treatment of taxpayers at the IRS. That if you were someone like Hunter Biden and you were under investigation, there were all of these additional approvals that investigators had to get. But if you're a local business person, they were able to go full bore on an investigation with no additional approvals. Same with the Justice Department. If you had someone who's connected to a presidential candidate, there was a lot of tapping of the brakes. But if an average person, or you could argue leading up to this election, Donald Trump, there hasn't been the same tapping of the brakes in that case. So it's about having consistency, having confidence in our institutions that people will be treated fairly. And just if you can give me one more sec, I also think it's relevant because when you look at what happened in October of 2020, there was a complete suppression of this story on the platforms. And what we know now is that the reporting was accurate. And so this, I think, really is the beginning of this conversation about free speech, free press, censorship on platforms, and where you can truly have free speech in this marketplace.
I mean, I think what's so amazingly damning about your incredible report is that you are showing how the Department of Justice, the IRS, the mainstream media, and social media all colluded with the Democratic Party. And if I am an average American who's not on board with that, where do we go from here? I mean, what is we believe in building things, right? We believe in restoring trust. How do I tell an average person that they should trust these institutions after a bombshell like this, Catherine?
Well, I think the question is there's a larger question here about the change in the marketplace. When I lost my job, I got terminated by CBS in February. I took some time to educate myself about the marketplace, and I saw that there's really been this tectonic shift in the way that Americans are consuming their news and information. I was lucky to spend some time with Barry talking about her experience and sharing sort of what she saw as the next chapter in the new horizons here. And you can't argue with the numbers. The public is really flocking to these new platforms. They feel that these are platforms where they can be the judge of the facts and the truth, and that they've got the the skill set to do that. They don't have to rely on big corporate media to do that for them. I'm not saying corporate media disappears. Corporate media, I think, will always have a seat at the table, but we see these diversity of voices coming up on the platforms, the free press, and there's just a bigger marketplace, and there are now more seats at the table, and Americans have more choices about where they get their news and what they consider to be authentic, reliable information.
You are showing how the Department of Justice, the IRS, the mainstream media, and social media all colluded with the Democratic Party